Today of people you haven't seen for a long time and those you are seeing for the first time. We are glad that you have been able to accept our invitations today. My name is Lichisa Tsenudi. I have already been introduced as the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. Together, the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces are here to interact with you. You are our special guests. Organizations that come from our communities that are here, your non-governmental organizations, non-profit organizations, lobby organizations, and organizations of all kinds in business and generally, broadly speaking, in our communities. We are also glad that representatives of our neighbors in the world are here with us. People from different countries who represent their countries in our country, that you've accepted our invitation to come and hear us. This is one of the things that when we started in 2014 we did, but in Pretoria, where we invited all the diplomats to come and talk to them about our take of what was going to be happening, what has been happening, and where we anticipate our relationship to go to. So it is always for us a special moment when we are able to interact with our guests from the diplomatic arena. We are also glad that there are people from universities as well. We have a special relationship with them from a variety of angles, not just from our oversight responsibility, but also from the capacity initiatives and research initiatives that inform some of the work that we do, the evidence that we often use to look at our responsibilities comes from these institutions. And many of our members are studying, they are learning, hopefully embracing the necessity for lifelong learning, which the current environment requires urgently. And so we are glad for that kind of relationships and so on. Of course, the people from business who do work, great work, and interact with us, also pay taxes loyally, regularly, without being cajoled to do so. It's glad to meet over the small sessions we are going to have today. The media, the fourth sector, as it is often referred to, is an important participant in being with us today. I must also just, in advance of October 19, what do we call it? Observe a moment in our country when bad things happen to the media. And those attempts to close it up, ban it because it promoted and expressed problematic perspective are gone and should be gone forever. And so when we observe that moment on October 19, it will be a special occasion as well. So we are glad that you are here from the press. Your interaction between us and the people who have elected us to be in Parliament is an important role. There are issues, constant issues, battles we fight with one another that are necessary to ensure that we all serve the public in the best of our ability. Of course, members of Parliament, members of the institutions that support democracy who are here, and representatives of trade unions, from government departments, and from the House of Traditional Leaders, Khosi Mahlangu. We are glad you are here with us today, sir, that you represent an important sector in the work that we do, the communities that we represent in the rural areas. The urban-rural dynamics are an important phenomenon, and to the extent that you engage with us on those issues, it's absolutely crucial that representative of people from rural areas like yourselves be part of the occasions like this where we interface with you. We are going to, as expected, a brief screening. I hope you are ready. People who are working on these technologies here, we would like to show you a brief, because this year, the theme, as agreed to in Parliament, is working, making sure that our future works better, learning from Madiba and Masisulu. And so the brief screening, which is not long, will say one or two things about those two heroes of the struggle, people who represent some of the best things that we would like to, that we aspire to, things we would like to see in public representatives generally, but also even outside of the system of governance. So let's allow that to go ahead. Before we do that, please give yourself a round of applause for being here with us. This is an element and a component of active citizens, that even if we invited you, you had a choice to say no, but you accepted it and you are here. Thank you very much for that. Let's see the screening. Please proceed.
From the humble beginnings of Mvezo village, Transkei in South Africa's province of the Eastern Cape, a statesman, a unifier, and a leader of note was born. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela grew to leadership ranks in his movement, the African National Congress. His activism against apartheid led to his capture in 1962 and imprisonment in 1964 at Robben Island. Mandela emerged a unifying magnet in a country where genocide and bloodshed was a threat any moment to peaceful and safe elections in 1994.
In the name of peace, democracy and freedom for all, I stand here before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people.
Mandela became a symbol of unity during his life and still continues posthumously with his ideals and his legacy. His love for his people, especially the children and the poor, will live in many of our minds and souls forever. As we celebrate the centenary of the birth of Madiba, we also commemorate 100 years of a remarkable and rooted woman, Mama Albertina Sisulu, who was arrested under the General Laws Amendments Act in 1963 and later nominated Nelson Mandela in Parliament to become South Africa's first democratic president in 1994.
Mr. Chairman, I nominate Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela for election as president.
Will you please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God"?
So help me God.
The centenary of Madiba and Masisulu symbolizes both the struggle against apartheid and the democracy we continue to enjoy today. Their lives are a legacy our country and the world will cherish for generations. Parliament of the Republic of South Africa salutes these two liberation struggle giants. Our country will remain indebted for their sweat and that of many heroes.
Thank you very much. We'd like to request the Speaker of the National Assembly to come forward, having heard the basis and the foundation of this year's theme, learning from Madiba and Masisulu. Ma'am, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker and Program Director. And I take this opportunity, must I have both this and this? Yeah. I'd like Is it fine?
It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. We've switched off this one. This one must be on now. It's okay.
I would like to welcome all our guests that have left everything to come and be with us and listen to us this morning, share about the work that we do. I greet people who come from the diplomatic corps. I greet members of parliament and former members of parliament, provincial speakers. We also have Hoshi Mahlangu from the House of Traditional Leaders, representatives of institutions supporting democracy, members of the judiciary, representatives of government departments, and civil society organizations, academia, business, trade union reps, and the most important, without whom we wouldn't be able to communicate and know a lot of things, and that is members of the media, with whom we enjoy a very important relationship of love. Well, half the time irritation, but a very necessary relationship. Believe you me, I take that relationship very seriously in the service of our people, because our people have to know all the things that are communicated by the media, whether we like it or not, because they also have a role and they must play their role. Of course, as people living and operating within this country and within the multilateral space within which we operate, know that the theme of this year is very well known. 2018 is a special year because of its theme, first of all, but also because of some special things that have happened to us for which we are grateful, and the lessons we continue to learn. Just recently, we were honored through the United Nations when a statue of our founding president was unveiled in New York. I think no country has enjoyed a better honor than we have, because we so happen to be South Africans, and therefore country sons and daughters born in the same land as this great international icon, Utata Nelson Mandela. And so I think we need to applaud ourselves, we need to applaud South Africa, we need to applaud the world for recognizing the values that made him such a special human being. And so I do think we should do that practically. So as we come before you to share with you our assessment and the report back to yourselves as the sectors that somehow come into contact with us as we do our work in different portfolios, in different arms of the state, as we try also to build a developmental state that will play the best role it can in the service of South Africans. We are preoccupied with this particular fact that I've just started with, about the theme, about our international icon. And so it seems very easy, especially also knowing that here with us are members of the diplomatic corps that are here representing different countries. We think, actually there's a sector I didn't specify, and that is young people who are coming from different institutions of higher education. You too are very welcome. Particularly because we have confidence in the future because of you. And so we have a responsibility to hand over the past by reminding you of what has happened, who has come before us. Our people say, Inyathi ibuzwa kwabaphambili. It is those that were ahead of us from whom we must learn. And therefore, we who are still here where we are this way telling you, Ipi Inyathi. Inyathi, now to be literal, when you say Inyathi ibuzwa kwabaphambili, you are checking with those who are ahead whether they've seen the buffalo. Did you see it? I don't know if any of you have been to game reserves. We've been told when we are visiting a game reserve that there is nothing you want to avoid more than an angry buffalo. When you see a loner buffalo, you must know, you must try and steer away from it. And so our people have taken that lesson and they've inserted it into the things that have survived for ages in our languages to tell us, beware of an angry buffalo. I'm not talking about the president, I'm just... I'm talking about a buffalo as our people over the centuries, over millennia, have thought it fit to hand over to younger generations, beware of the angry buffalo. Inyathi ibuzwa kwabaphambili. That's why every generation, you are today young people, and I'm talking to the students now. Tomorrow, you will be where we are. We will have handed over to you, and you will have the responsibility to hand over to those younger generations who today are being born or are little, are still toddlers. Inyathi ibuzwa kwabaphambili. Now, I want to tell you about the work we have done as this 5th Parliament, because this will probably be the last media briefing and stakeholder event where we will share with you aspects of our work. We will also circulate to you documentation that can tell you more, especially the students. We normally start at the local and then work our way towards the national and go to the global. But because of the way I have started today, where I started my briefing, I'll start by sharing with you, and I will also ask my colleagues when they come to the mic to also talk about those activities in which they participate in the broad international work that we do, because Parliament does a lot of international work, but there's never enough time to say everything there is to be shared about the work that we do. So I'll say what I can say, because at the beginning of this 5th Parliament, the 4 presiding officers, we also have other presiding officers who are, we call them house chairpersons. I think there's one, I saw Mr. Frolik here and Mr. Nyambi. There are other house chairpersons from both houses. Other parliaments call them assistant speakers. In other words, they are those people who assist us in other aspects of the work under the executive authority, who are the 2 people that head the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces. There are 2 houses in Parliament. So stop calling me Speaker of Parliament. I'm not. I'm serious. Are you listening? I'm not Speaker of Parliament. It's something we think our Parliament needs, but it's not yet there. It does not exist, that position. But we are hopeful because we've been hearing people talk, especially in the majority party, about creating that office because of the volume of work in Parliament. So in future, we do hope that this country, through the Constitution, will create the office of the Speaker of Parliament. Presently, as we have 2 houses, we have a Speaker of the National Assembly, and then we have the presiding officer who heads the presiding office, I'm talking now collectively, of the National Council of Provinces. So that's a house that's focused on provinces, the 9 provinces we have around the country. Now, at the beginning in 2014, we met, the 4 of us, and discussed what is broadly in the plate of international work of Parliament as a whole. Parliament as a whole is the two houses. 400 seats, 400 MPs of different parties from all over the country in the National Assembly, and then delegations from each of the 9 provinces sit in the National Council of Provinces. You also have 10 representatives coming from the local government sphere around the country. It's important, especially for younger people, to understand when you say parliament, what are you talking about? We are talking about the South Africans who, through the mechanisms given in our constitution, represent the whole country in the fashion I've just described. Now, we decided that the Speaker is going to lead our delegation that participates in a body that we are affiliated to, the Inter Parliamentary Union. The chairperson of the National Council of Provinces will lead the delegation that represents us in the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. These are global bodies. So these are bodies of parliaments of the world. They somehow go to those bodies and represent their people, their parliaments, through whatever decisions and positions that those parliaments would have processed and arrived at. So I have been participating, and in fact, we are about to go and attend our last conference in Geneva, where we will represent the Parliament of South Africa and through it the people at the 139th Parliamentary Assembly in Geneva, which is the head office of the IPU. People of Cape Town can't forget that we once hosted the IPU here in this ICC. We once had a large conference here some years ago. It's today the 139th Assembly. That time it was the 118th Assembly. So that was some years back, where the whole world, all parliaments of the world were here in Cape Town. That doesn't mean we're not going to move Parliament when it's time to discuss that point. I know people of Cape Town get very angry when we talk about that topic. Now, one thing we must share with you is the fact that the Inter Parliamentary Union, which is chaired by the youngest, prettiest woman I've ever come across chairing or presiding over a large body like that. She is the president of the IPU. She comes from Mexico. And the IPU agreed to set aside some time to honor the centenary of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. So as we go, we are honored. We feel on your behalf that the world has really honored us in this year, which is in fact the year before the next and the elections that will dismantle this 5th parliament and have, by the end of the year, a new set of MPs from different parties. So that's an event that will happen in Geneva in the program of the 139th Assembly of the IPU. The second important activity that will happen, where we, as the delegation from this Parliament of South Africa, We will participate, and in fact, we will play a prominent role. And we've been preparing. Excuse me. Wherever you see me speaking, you must know at some point I'm going to cough. Don't know whether it happens to everybody, and I don't know whether it has anything to do with being a public representative. It's a very toxic space.
Occupational hazard.
Yeah, Deputy Speaker says occupational hazard. So comes with the terrain. You must always be both resilient but also very humble. Very careful. So while we are in Geneva, we have been talking to the administration of the IPU, where we are going to be given a bit of space to hold a meeting with parliamentarians and representatives of parliaments of the BRICS countries. And we will take the opportunity because indeed, as you know, BRICS has been around. South Africa has been part of BRICS for some time, but it was only in the course of this 5th Parliament that, with the initiative from Russia, that started and in fact offered to host a meeting of the parliaments of the BRICS countries in June 2015. There were agreements that we create a BRICS parliamentary forum, so that on that score, in the legislative sector of the countries of the BRICS forum, that in fact was hosted earlier this year here in South Africa, we too as parliaments look at our role as the parliamentary sector in taking up the issues and follow through and ensure that our countries that are represented at the Heads of State Summit are following through on the commitments that have been made at the summits. Because there are commitments that are made, and you could either just go and shelve them and forget about them, or you find ways of ensuring that through our structures in our various countries, in our various institutions, in particular parliaments, we are actually following through, and we are finding ways of ensuring that these commitments are not just pen on paper, they are actually turned into programs that different structures in our countries are making sure are going to be implemented. And as the bodies that perform the oversight function in any dispensation, we as parliaments have the interest in ensuring that we follow through. So I just got a wonderful collective of information in a document last night, only last night. And I realized that, oh, this actually was mooted in 2013 when the countries that finalized on forming BRICS met in South Africa. And in our thoughts now, as we go to Geneva and we are convening yet another meeting, we are going to follow through on a document that had been put before the parliaments as a draft multilateral declaration of intent, where our own Madame Thandi Modise participated in that first meeting of parliamentary representatives in Moscow. We had a second meeting where on the sidelines of another IPU meeting, our speaker in India chaired, and we talked about how are we going to play oversight over the implementation of the principles that are contained in the SDGs. Because you know, leaders are always meeting. They are talking about what are their commitments to their people. You mustn't think those meetings are about anything else. It's about those things that must be done in order to improve the lives of our people in the various societies that are led by these leaders. So the SDGs were adopted at the UN. Then the BRICS Parliament representatives met at an IPU in Geneva and said, what is our role? Where do we focus? There are 17 of the SDGs. Which are the key for you? Because you can't implement everything all at the same time. It's humanly not possible. I know when you are throwing bricks at us from outside, attacking us, you want delivery now on everything now. But of course, you've got to be practical about things. You programmatize your commitments, you put them into that which is doable, humanly possible, and in fact, within the limits of the resources that we have, what can we do? So India also convened and chaired that discussion, which I participated in. The third meeting of the BRICS Parliamentary Forum happened in Russia, but was chaired by China. This, that is coming next week, is chaired by South Africa again, and we are going to make an effort because we realize that that declaration, beautiful as it is, and we know that everybody agreed on it, on its content, but what are the technical steps that must make it real and implementable? How do we really administratively, legally, and every other way make sure that it's a basis for something that can be brought back and can be implemented? So that's BRICS. I want to talk about SADC. The main thing I want to highlight is that we are participants in the SADC Parliamentary Forum, which has offices in Windhoek, Namibia. We, the South African Parliament, have contributed one of our staff members who works there on the gender front, because the issues on which we agree in our laws, in our constitution, are what informs our participation, our contributions at all these fora that we participate in. So when we go there, we're supposed to represent you on issues you know, are part of our law, are part of our policies and the way we think as South Africa. So we participate at SADC. We, for 21 years, have been battling with one issue, and that is the issue of our parliamentary forum becoming a parliament, because we are the last in Africa. In the sub-regions of Africa, there are 5 of them. We are the only one that does not have a parliament, not a parliamentary forum. A parliament that can pass laws, that knows what are the agreed policy positions on various matters that are always preoccupying any state, or any government, policies on transport, on health matters, on education, on all the portfolios in government. We agree on them, we talk about them, we go and sign agreements, international agreements about them. So the only thing we're left with in this corner of the SADC area is to have an actual parliament that can pass laws on all these matters on which we keep agreeing, but we in the SADC area don't have the legal instrument to actually legislate and turn these agreements and these policies and positions into laws that can bind those that we elect to help us to make our lives better in the community of SADC. So for the first time in this recent summit that took place in Windhoek, Namibia, we managed to reach, for this agenda item, to reach the agenda of the heads of states. And so there's a principled understanding that we will soon be able to move the parliamentary forum to become a fully fledged parliament that can then very soon be in a position to make laws. So these are the things we do when we keep going, boarding an aeroplane, going away to some forum, some meeting. These are the things. This one we had to work on for 21 years. Surely. But we are happy today that finally the heads of states started to discuss this matter. What did I tell you? So this one, who's the chair, and that is our brother and comrade Hage Geingob, he promised that he will, in his 1 year of chairing the SADC summit, he will make sure that this matter moves. So we are happy that we have made that progress. I just want to then say that we also host, as South Africa, the Pan-African Parliament, of which my sister and colleague will say more, because as you know, Mama Thandi Modise leads our delegation to the Pan-African Parliament. I think you probably wonder, what do they go and do there? We never see them, we never hear anything, but it's a body that is part of the architecture of the African Union and moves the agenda of ensuring that as countries of the continent, we reach one day that place which we want to get to, and that is actually becoming an entity of a people that belong to a continent that continuously strengthens itself and makes itself an able partner in the politics of the world. And as South Africa, it is something that is in our constitution, that we see ourselves as a country that is internationalist in its orientation, that has a role to play to create a better world. We can only create a better world if we ourselves as a society improve ourselves inwardly within the workings of our country and the politics and the structures, and take seriously our responsibilities as a player within the whole globe. Hence, we welcome the way the world has appreciated one of us, that is our founding president. There are many other areas on which we will be sharing with you. I think the Deputy Speaker will definitely not leave this place without talking about the fourth industrial revolution and our stance on it, and how we understand it, and how we will take our place also in improving our ability to participate within that field. I want to lastly mention the fact that while we went to Cuba, we had a multi-party delegation that visited that country, a country that has played a big role in the liberation of our country, and that's something we will never forget, and we will never not talk about, because many of them laid their lives to ensure that today we have a freedom, we have even the free space within which to make mistakes, because we're human, so we'll make mistakes, but to work on a lasting democratic dispensation within which our developmental state, which Parliament is part of, continuously creates better and better mechanisms to actually ensure that this better life for our people is realized. And it's realized in many different spaces, in different ways. And so we are honored for the time that we are here in Parliament as elected representatives, that we have the honor to serve you, the people of South Africa, but also our friends in the world and representatives of other countries that have people who share the same values as us, or maybe share different values. What's important is to agree to disagree, but also to agree to respect one another. Because in the international forums that we go to, we don't all agree about everything. No, we don't. I'm sure diplomats will tell you that it doesn't work that way. But what's important is to respect one another. And so I can't resist saying that when we have a major player who is so disrespectful, it's so uncomfortable and irritating. Probably enough said on that matter. What else should I say? I think I should leave the stage now until there's a good reason when now we are at the question and answer session to come back to this microphone, except to say, of course, Mutapo, you will have prepared the document that will share about the rest of the work that we do. Oh, the TB caucus.
Yes, you have to talk.
I must talk about the TB caucus. Minister Aaron Motsoaledi one day came to the presiding officers and told us something we didn't know. And that is that TB is the #1 killer of human beings all over the world. As in, it kills more people than any other disease. Maybe you didn't know this, but we've since learned it. We got so scared that we agreed to Minister Motsoaledi that, you know, because that thing is unlike HIV and AIDS, where two people have to decide to love one another so much that, in fact, the one can transfer the disease that the other one has. Now, that you do that way. TB is just by us sitting like this. But other things I didn't know is that TB is not only confined to the chest. You can have TB of the stomach. You can have TB of the womb. There's a pretty young lady who is one of the champions. By the way, Miss South Africa as well is a survivor. And she's from here in the Western Cape. And she talks about it. And she's a proud survivor who shares about her experience. She was also in New York. But there's another very pretty girl who's a personality in the media space who talks about how she tried so hard to have a baby. And it's when she was busy with that project of trying to have a baby that the doctor discovered that she wouldn't be able to have a baby because she had TB in her womb. So it just shows you can never know enough. And that, in fact, we all have a responsibility to share this information because, in fact, TB is more rife in the poorest sections of our society. And unfortunately, the public sector in the health system does not cure TB. It sends you to the private sector. So many people simply can't. No, it's the other way around. It's the opposite, yes. The private sector does not deal with TB, but only the public sector. So in New York, we had an opportunity where the World Stop TB Caucus or partnership had agreed that now the caucus must go to the highest level of world leadership to persuade our leaders from different countries of the world to be alert, to put resources and programs in place to assist, to push this campaign. In South Africa, we have a responsibility, and we agreed this with the minister, to circulate information about the details of the ravages of TB around our own country. Where is it that we've got to focus our energies and our activities in order for us to be seriously part of this campaign that indeed must reverse. And remember, Madiba was a survivor of TB. That's one of the things that we're very proud of, because Madiba showed us in practice himself that, first of all, first hurdle that you must go over is not to be ashamed to talk about it. Is not to be ashamed to talk about the fact that you are a survivor of TB, because that then helps you to help the next person to do what you need to do, and that is to go to where you will find help in order for you to become part of that special level of people, a survivor of TB. Maybe you will hear a story, because this is one of the things I've learned from the stories of TB survivors like Madiba and other TB survivors like the young lady who turned out to have had TB of the womb and could not have children. But you need, in fact, Miss South Africa talks about it, about her surviving TB and how she's a proud champion that is now joining the efforts all over the world to talk about TB and being a TB survivor and the advice that we get from those champions. For now, DS, please come and do your job.
Keep this in your hand.
Keep, man. Angidasasebenzi, uyivalile.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I wish you are giving us a different take of project management now. I'm now going to invite the Chancellor of the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, to speak to us. Madam Thandi Modise.
Thank you very much, fellow presiding officers, Your Excellencies, members of parliament, members of provincial legislatures, Khosi Mahlangu, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. The fifth Parliament of the Republic of South Africa is approaching its end. We are very confident that we will finish this last mile as strongly as we started. We also think that we will hand over to the sixth Parliament a stronger Parliament. This engagement with you today, as diplomats, as stakeholders, as the media, as members of the public, is one of the many ways in which Parliament uses to try and strengthen our interface with the people, to account for our work of lawmaking, of oversight, of public participation and public education, to advance democracy and development in South Africa. We introduced these briefings, I think, in November 2017, when we actually pledged to up our game, to evaluate and report on our own performance in a manner that seeks to build a relationship, but also to build on the social compact with the general populace of South Africa. We also think that it is part of that dream of South Africa to ensure that we keep in line with the requirements and the aspirations of the National Development Plan and our medium-term strategic framework. Sis Baleka, the speaker, has already spoken about the celebrations we're looking forward to of Masisulu and Dadu Nelson Mandela. So I will not touch it. Our celebrations, including that of the two icons, have also included the Students' Parliament, a youth summit, the launch of the thematic book series, the IPU agreement as discussed by Mayor Mbete to host the Mandela celebrations. We have also continued throughout these 5 years with our sectoral parliaments on women, on youth, on disability, and sometimes on any other matter which might need to be addressed as Parliament representing the people of South Africa. We are presenting this report at a very critical time when the global economy outlooks remain subdued at home, We are contending with a technical recession that demonstrates, to us at least, that the headwinds are not so negative, that there is hope in the horizon. We are also very clear that we are doing and ticking the boxes to ensure that the economy of South Africa begins to pick up. Because our challenges, our enemies, hunger, violent crime, social ills, need to be brought down, and the only way we know how is to ensure that your economy must pick up, your education must be on a faster track, so that you begin to help ourselves to a point where every community member, every family can begin to look out. So we don't see ourselves as a parliament that just goes there to make laws. We see ourselves as activists within our communities and our constituencies. As Parliament, we want to say that we are confronting these challenges as clinically as we can. If you go through the report of the high-level panel and its recommendations, which Parliament is currently processing. Parliament has not been outside the things that affect South Africa. We have adopted a belt-tightening program. We have initiated a debate on ways to revive our economy from this technical recession. We have upped our game on providing legislative oversight to drive our own recovery. Parliament has been given a clean audit by the Auditor General this year, and I think we are in our 4th consecutive period. We are striving to lead by example in ensuring accountable and proper management of the public funds as required by the law. And we think that unless Parliament pulls, in this case, the two wearing stockings, our stockings up, we will not manage to force the rest of the executive to pull their socks up. And therefore, we think we're doing the right thing, trying to tick all the boxes and go beyond ticking all the boxes. Challenge ourselves annually and see if we can maintain the standards of making sure that when the executive appears in Parliament, Parliament herself is not found wanting. At the beginning of October, Parliament passed 11 bills now in 2018. The President has already accented to 2. The other bills that were passed in 2018 are, amongst others, the Extension of Security of Tenure Amendment Bill, the Liquor Products Amendment Bill, the Public Audit Amendment Bill, which is a committee bill which gives the Auditor General the authority to take remedial actions on findings and recommendations, and also to be able to ensure that the financial losses suffered by the state are recovered. Now, this is crucial for us as Parliament, given the recent history of allegations of state capture, of perpetual maladministration, and where we have noted we have not acted against people who continue to put us into that. We want to say that we are also, and Chief Whip of the majority party is sitting here, we have also passed the political party funding bill. We have passed the basic conditions of employment amendment bill. We have passed the labor laws amendment bill, which is a private member's bill, which extends parental leave to men who may not actually be living with their children or who are adoptive fathers. We are busy with 35 other bills which are residing in the National Assembly and 20 bills which are now currently with us in the NCOP. We think that we will be able to deal with most of what is in front of us before we rise next year for the elections. Parliament fully recognizes that an active citizenry is a defining feature of any working and sustainable democracy. To advance realization of our ambitious mandate of promoting public participations, we've stepped up on our levels of communications and of our unmediated engagements with the public through various means. And I think Ndadem Muloto more than we are on Twitter, we are on whatever. And we think that way, Parliament makes sure that we are not always lacking in issues of exposing ourselves and being exposed to the public and or anybody else. We want to say that during the period under review, the NCOP took its flagship program, Taking Parliament to the People, to the Western Cape. We've been to the Eastern Cape, we were in the Free State, and this year we are in Gauteng. We are dealing with different challenges which our research shows us in a particular province. For instance, we went to the Eastern Cape on education, we went to the Free State on health. We are in Gauteng this year looking at the impact of migration on service delivery in that province. We have also, in this 5-year term, increased our focus in the sense that we no longer just go once. We now go in 3 legs. We follow up. A year later, we are up there just making sure that the promises and the commitments made by the executive of all 3 spheres of government are being kept to, and we police them. We have the Joint Constitutional Review Committee of the National Assembly and the NCOP. I'm sure it has caught your attention. It is that committee that embarked on an intensive and extensive program of consulting South Africans and exploring the possible amendments to Section 25 to enable us to expropriate land without compensation. We will be coming back to the public with the results of this and what the South African people in the majority said during those hearings will be what I think Parliament will recommend to the country. I think it is important to note that in May, Cabinet invoked Section 100 in the Northwest Provincial Government. It is important because of the 2 houses of Parliament, it is only the NCOP that has a mediation and monitoring role at any stage when any executive intervenes on any level. For instance, Section 100 is when national administration takes over a provincial administration. We play a role. When the provincial government intervenes at a local government level, we play a role. We can say yes, we can say no. So it's important for us to say that at all given times, we will continue with what is on our plate and do all the other things which we meet up with, which are sometimes unexpected because nobody plans for an intervention. Now, over the last few years, we have seen the role of Parliament growing. You have seen the focused attention of oversight on ESCOM, on the SABC, on the SAA. There is an ongoing focus right now on the Department of Home Affairs on the issues of citizenry. Our Parliament has also, through the leadership of the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, embraced the concept of the fourth industrial revolution. We held a roundtable discussion of pinnacle layers within the executive and academia, and set in motion one of the most energizing and progressive readiness programs. We, as parliaments of the world, the presiding officers, also meet intermittently to look at the challenges that the fourth industry might be putting to us. As Africa in particular, we think we are not so fast, but we are meeting and we are discussing ways to mitigate and to ready ourselves. We want to say that we want to make sure that the South African society, including the most vulnerable, the abused women, the children, the needy girl child who sometimes goes uneducated, buy into the opportunities which might be presented by the areas of interest that we go in, the programs that we sometimes come up with. We want to make sure that we are not just talking to the fourth industrial revolution, but we are preparing for it. We want to say that we are in a very unhappy situation as the South African Parliament. The legislative framework of South Africa on equality, on gender transformation is there, but these continue to become a challenge not only in the workplace out there, but within our own space as Parliament and within our communities. The gender-specific budget initiative, which we have been advocating for some reason, Speaker, has eluded us in this last 5 years. We've been preaching about it, we have not done it. But specifically, if you compare us now, this fifth Parliament, to the first democratic Parliament, you would see that, in fact, we have regressed on issues of enabling women, whether they were MPs or employees at Parliament, to feel more equal, to be attracted to stay on a little bit longer in the environment. And I'm hoping the acting Secretary to Parliament is hearing me properly. We have noticed that the number of executives, not only in the Alleman public of South Africa, but also in Parliament, the number of executives, which include women and are specific to women, are not so impressive. So we want to make sure that we address this challenge and accelerate the pace of gender transformation within South Africa. Parliament has a Women in Leadership program. We hope that it will help us unleash the potential that we think we need. One of the pillars of our strategic plan is to build an institutional capacity to take the work of Parliament and of the legislative sector to a higher level. Under the guidance of Speaker Mbete, in the third Parliament, we established the beginnings of the legislative sector. We are now moving towards formalizing the legislative sector, because if you look at our constitution, it does have strong features of federalism. And therefore, you do need, for the legislative sector of South Africa, which is one of the three arms of state, you need to ensure that it is more formalized, more organized, for it to begin to claim its space. As things are, unless we formalize that sector, Parliament and the legislatures will continue to be the Cinderella in the tripartite of the arms of state. So we have that. We're hoping that through the legislative sector, not only will we tighten our hand as an arm of state, but we will also get into issues like make sure that what the high panel level has given to us is monitored throughout the country in all the legislative arms, make sure that things like sectoral bargaining for conditions of services for the employees within the sector are equal and uniform, and make sure that, in fact, in the legislative sector of South Africa, you can have a one-stop employment. One can move, because we also are envisaging setting up an academy. We notice that there is an academy which deals with the public service, which is not necessarily alive to the sector of the legislative sector. So we think that we will approach the end of this fifth term very optimistic. We are busy with our close-up reports, which we will hand over to whoever may be taking over from both the Speaker and I in the coming year. We are hoping that the sixth Parliament will be smoother, because when we came in into a very rocky period, and somehow we think that whatever it is that we have gone through has been learning and learning and learning, and that we think that, especially around the issues of labor in Parliament, that we have managed somehow to stabilize. We are not yet there, and I know that we will get there if we put our heads together. As we do the close-up, especially for us in the National Council of Provinces, we will also be putting up recommendations for a relook at the mandate of the National Council of Provinces, a relook at the structure and the size of the legislature. I thank you, and I want to say that a thicker report on the fifth term around these issues I'm sure, will be circulated by us. I just spoke to the points. Thank you very much. As I was walking away, I saw my friend from Russia, and he's looking at us, because when we were in Russia, they hosted BRICS because they were chairing. And in the first meeting, we actually adopted, if you go to the declaration of that meeting, we actually adopted the foundational papers of the BRICS Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those two hopefully useful insights. I do want to add a few words to what the chairperson says here, a thicker report. I'm going to add, in fact, a slightly more creative and inviting some of you on how best to package material such that it becomes memorable, it becomes readable in the days of very little attention. But we do know that there is still enough people who still go for thicker reports and so on, narrative reports, so that we must both be provided for wherever level at which we operate. What it says, in short, is that we think there's a lot of stuff we've been doing and so on. Let me just add a few things, for example. Recently, there's an annual science and technology forum that meets. This time it was in Cape Town, and at the meeting, one of the presenters was a Professor Mike Bruton, and he debates the appropriateness of calling this the fourth industrial revolution. He says instead it should be called the first digital revolution. And so he goes on to argue and present what it possibly represents. And part of the reason why we thought we should, ahead of time, not necessarily early enough, but to say, what is this fourth industrial revolution? What does it represent for all of us? What does it mean? What are the good things about it that we can acknowledge? But what's bad about it? What is it likely to create problems for us and so on? And what, being responsible for oversight, what can we do in advance to prepare ourselves to exercise oversight on what it happens? Our principal story as government is industrializing so that we maximize our development potential. And in it now, we have to deal with this phenomena that emerges from the previous ways of doing things. And the difference is in the speed with which changes are going to occur and the impact they are likely to have in a variety of areas. We hope from an oversight perspective that we have provided a useful foundation, and this can be found on our website, on our YouTube channel, some of the stories around this. I do also want to say one or two things about media and communication. The global and international environment is continually changing. We've now had launched in Lily's Leaf recently the Africa-China channel that is going to be coming up soon. And it's launched, and it has a huge penetration of the African continent, adding to the diversity of media in our country. In addition, the Latin American environment also has, of course, launched what they call Telesu, which is also now coming to Southern Africa and in our country. And they've also launched and are going to be communicating between Latin America and the African continent. But also we too will be getting information from Latin America, from Telesu. Because you know as well as we do know, these channels and the variety of them are also based on the shifting and changing international and multilateral relationship. The observation that some may not have been as objective, or some of the stories they focus on may not have been happy ones. But Parliament, we have been on behalf of Parliament participating in that environment to ensure that we can communicate our own story, but also receive stories from the variety of places on planet Earth, from at least those sources that are diverse than the current setup allows for. And so we're now going to move to the second part of this program, in other words, questions and answers. And I will ask, I nearly called him something for which he will cry the whole week. Come over, Ndade Mutapo Mloto, and do the honors for us. We always recognize questions and answers as opportunities to add things that we left out and those that we may perhaps not have looked at in reporting. So your questions might just prompt the appropriate responses. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly. Thank you, the Speaker of the National Assembly, the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, for setting the stage for engagement. As the presiding officers have said, we have circulated the documents to the media right here, and the rest of the esteemed guests, because we have got all your information, your contact details, we are going, or we might have already forwarded the documents, the full versions of the documents to all your emails. We are going to, I know that it says questions and answers, but of course compliments and comments will also be welcomed. And just to say to the presiding officers that for your convenience, with all the mics on your ears, you can just respond to the questions while seated. You don't have to come to the podium. I will be the one who will be facilitating from the podium. So I hope that my colleagues have taken the positions within the hall with the roaming marks so that we can have them closer to the guests as they participate in these question and answers, compliments, and comments. So the floor is open for comments, for questions, for compliments. I'm going to take the first round of 5 hands. It will be appreciated if we can just limit ourselves to, if it's questions, to limit ourselves to not more than 2 questions. And of course, if it is comment, not to be too long, so that we give as many guests as possible an opportunity to participate. So just identify yourself, and I will just identify you starting from here, ma'am. You will be the second on this table, you will be the third, you will be the fourth. You will be the fifth. Okay. So let's start with those 5 hands in that particular order, starting from here. And then to the table, 2 hands, and moving to that table, and then the last one. You can shoot me.
Good afternoon to my esteemed leaders. Judy Nokeri, the Secretary General of the Black Business Council. We've just emerged from the Job Summit, honorable members. I'd like to ask you for your views on the plan that's been put forward. That's my first question. It really relates to the protection of jobs and the growing of jobs. And then in conclusion, as you two formidable, remarkable women lead us into the 2019 elections, I'd like your reflections on what is it that you would have liked to have seen done that has not been done as we move into 2020 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Short and sweet.
Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Thandile Sunduza. I'm a former member. I'd like to just compliment the 2 ladies. I've seen them sweating their makeup when around those houses there. I must say you really reflect the legacy of Masisulu. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, presiding officers, for the invitation to attend this auspicious event. I'm Zalna Jansen, and I represent my own lobbying firm. And my question is around the bills before Parliament. Presently, I think there's about 55 bills for both houses. And I've also noticed that Cabinet is still referring bills to Parliament, some of them Section 76. And the other thing I also notice is that I think in terms of the program of Parliament, there's about 16 weeks left. So my question is just around what the strategy is around bills that will not be finalized. Thank you.
Okay.
Good afternoon. I'm Nadundi Telisha from Deputy Minister Police, Parliament Liaison Officer there. I'd like to compliment both women of Imbokodo and also all of them, including the gentlemen, for the whole on what they've done in Parliament. I've got a question. I'm not sure whether it's going to be, I'll try and explain it. Once there's legislation that has been done in the National Assembly, who see to it that the departments, they start and implement those things? Because you might find out in most of our departments, we pass a legislation. And then in terms of operation, the DGs and the DDGs and those departments, they take 6 to a year to start to change the legislation. And the second question is the question of second layer leadership. In our parliament, as much as we have the 4 or 6 key presiding officers, do we have a space where we developed a second layer leadership on the same positions, even if though they are not getting paid, but you know that we have something like a shadow. For example, a shadow speaker that knows what the main speaker is doing, where in emergency, where we'll have somebody to step in, except the office. Do we have such kind of things? Thank you.
Okay, the 5th last question of this round.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Leti Wembata from Stellenbosch University and a Sustainable Development Planning graduate. So thank you, Womandla, for such a powerful morning. Thank you so much. We acknowledge the spirit of Mama Sisulu. So my question literally goes back to the ground levels, that we hear people who have got access to these kinds of spaces, but then the people of the Republic, which is the majority of this land, do not have access to this information. They don't know what their people do. We see them as we see them now, but we don't really know what is then the extent of the accessibility of this informationalism. Moving to the 4th industrial revolution, we know that internet plays such a huge amount of role, but then the people on the ground, the people that believe you represent on this land, do not have access to this. That's my first question. And also, what does Parliament mean to me as a young South African citizen? What do you mean to me? What does this House mean to us? What is our role in the space? Where are we in the space and in all these legislations and frameworks that we are heading towards, as we are, of course, championing especially the SDG number 5, which is the holistic nature of the ultimate development of this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Closing the first round on a high note from the leadership of Stellenbosch. Presiding officers, I'm going to leave it to you how you deal with the questions. Starting with the Deputy Speaker.
You know, the Deputy Speaker is like a biscuit, you know, the spare wheel. If you drivers will know what I'm talking about. No, let me start with the last questions about access to this information. Part of what I was saying earlier on is to expand the mechanisms and channels through which we communicate this. Today, when we go into any parliamentary space in the African continent, people know us because of some of those channels. But on the ground, not everybody necessarily have that kind of information and ability to communicate this. Part of what we are constantly battling with is to expand the information basis. If I may just let you know that we are talking to the SABC, for example. All along, the channel that we've been using is DSTV. That's limited for the elite in society who have access to that, including in the rest of the continent. So we are talking about this being a responsibility of all our television stations, including private ones, for coverage of this. This is in the law that regulate this channel. So we are actively working in that environment to change our ability to communicate to as many people as we can, using all their languages. On a regular basis, we are all on radio stations and so on. There's a GCIS community of stations inside the parliament precinct through which we communicate on an ongoing basis using people's languages, including chairpersons of communities try to do that. It's never enough. We also are exploring the level and creativity of doing this. Heavy text is not always necessarily the best way to communicate. So we are inviting you and others to help us do that. We've been approached before by creative artists who want to communicate this by song and other mechanisms and so on. So we recognize the necessity for the public and different publics in business, in community organizing, and whoever wants to have relationship and influence with the parliament must be able to know where to go to and what to do to be able to get that information. And to speed up the education process so that people have access, including infrastructure in a variety of places, so that they are able to respond to and speak to us promptly. Let me just go to the Jobs Summit and say that part of why we looked at the Fourth Industrial Revolution, so-called, is precisely because of the predictions by people involved that there are jobs that are going to be lost. Some of those jobs we won't mourn because they are bad for human beings anyway. If machines can do them, all the better. But what we want to emphasize is that the new jobs that are created, that are going to be created, obviously require of us to have levels of education that enables people to do that. This is part of what's going to happen with that environment. So the extent and the speed with which we can counter the destruction of unnecessary jobs that should be done differently, but with the creation of appropriate ones, presupposes a level of adult education, continuous learning and adjustment, that perhaps our education system needs to be better responsive than it is right now. So that would be the challenge that we are facing. That we think that institutions, in fact, the three spheres of government, have a number of areas in which they can be more creative about jobs, facilitating their creation, ensuring their security, longer staying, but also recognizing that they are expanding areas in which people are going to be employing themselves. That's a reality of that. That organized labor, for example, is also confronted with this reality of this problem of how people keep their jobs, how they learn to be able to do that. We've just done if I may just add here, assigned to initially 17, but it ended up being 15 experts to look at our legislation, to assess why that legislation did not produce what it was meant to do. Because we had in mind that some of this legislation, for example, on equality, should have had better impact than we think it has. What are the reasons for that not happening? We sought to understand that on the basis of evidence that the high-level panel sought to establish and so on. To the extent that they have determined that and have made recommendations, that is what we are looking at. We are hoping it will also inform our overall strategy going forward of the work of individual committees, but also we are talking about how much time we should spend in Parliament, as against spending time on the ground in places where we can appropriately assess the impact of legislation, come back to the legislator to make the appropriate remedial steps and actions on legislation. Some of it may require scrapping, some of it may require strengthening, to examine whether it's institution or the laws themselves, or its communication. And those are the challenges that we are facing, and hope that the lessons we have learned, we will be able to put them in the legacy report to the incoming parliament, summarize them to the best of our ability so that they can be acted upon and so on. Let me just make one final comment. On our previous theme was following up on people's commitments. Now, these are commitments that are politically, for example, expressed in manifestos. In the manifesto of the ruling party, there are certain commitments that are made. In the manifesto of opposition parties, there are certain commitments they have made to the people. So to the extent that we are able to follow through those commitments, it's an important agenda for Parliament in our diversity politically inside that institution. But internationally, the issues as mentioned already, the Sustainable Development Goals, Africa 2063, the SADC agenda for industrialization as a foundation for Africa-wide integration. It's an important agenda
the transformation of the IMF and World Bank, including the Security Council that South Africa is going to enter into now. The transformation of those institutions is our agenda. So as Parliament, we have a responsibility to ensure that those are transformed appropriately to reflect a more democratic foundation, rather than the power that now establishes how they operate and so on. And finally, on climate change, those are commitments. There are certain individual, family, neighborhood and community responsibility on the ground to realize the goals of Climate Change 21 as agreed to in Paris. And so those commitments are not worth the paper they are written on if, as Parliament, we do not commit them, communicate to them to you, so that you recognize them in how they are applicable in your families, in your neighborhoods, and in the country as a whole, in municipalities, in provinces, and so on, so that we see our actions as linked to a global agenda for change, for the better, wherever we are operating, and so on. That's a few of the things that I thought I should say.
Okay. Should I follow?
Please.
Thank you very much. Ms. Indusa, thank you for the compliments. I used to get under trouble, serious trouble with Masisul for not wearing stockings and earrings. So just for that, today I thought I should look like that. Ms. Nokweti, you, as Black Business Council, will know that it doesn't matter what we do in the end. What we need to do is keep the jobs that exist, make sure that people don't lose jobs. And one of the ways that others who have been in this situation have done is to ensure that you don't retrench and you don't create conditions which lead to employers and industries having to reduce workers. So South Africans need to be smart about the initiatives that they do. I'm one of those who do not believe that government's job is to create jobs. Government must do what it needs to do. It is open up the space, make it easy for their employing sector to create the jobs. So you create those conditions which make it easier for other people to create the jobs. Where you are in the public admin sector, you retain those jobs. Sometimes we need to have a conversation as South African citizens about what it really means to be in a recession. Not a technical recession like South Africa is, but what it actually means. And studies have been there, the first world recession, what happened to other countries? How did they pick up the economies? What are those things that still apply in today's world? So we need to do those things that we need to do. We need to challenge those who think they do not have the buying power. I think there is a lot of money, for instance, if you look at Tembisa and Soweto. And I think if you start being creative and create jobs within those communities, you can. The agricultural sector is untouched in South Africa. We have been talking to black farmers emerging. We have not done anything to ensure that they actually become serious players there. If you go to countries like Vietnam and you look at what they did once they got back their country, it's amazing how they did the small things. And one of the impressive things is that Vietnamese across the world contributed. It didn't matter whether it was 5 or 6 pence in America. They contributed to a national saving, and they did not go to the World Bank when they started with the massive industrialization which is there. So we need to then go back as South Africa to say, what are the things that we need to do as citizens that are simple, that says we are patriotic, that we can do to ensure. I think pull black money in black areas. Own your business. Hire your own. Create your own manufacturing and industrialize. So I'm almost sounding like I'm saying, stop with the exportation of raw materials. In fact, I am. I'm one of the proponents of beneficiation of the raw materials of South Africa in this country. And I say it, Speaker, I come from an area in Taung where we produce marble. It goes away. It comes back, and people in Taung can't even afford it. When it comes back, I'm very sorry from the diplomat from Italy, it's called Italian marble. Hello. Why don't we polish and manufacture whatever it is that we want to manufacture out of it? So I'm saying it's things that are doable that we can do. There is, Ms. Jansen says, 55 bills in front of you with 16 weeks to go. Yes, ma'am. We are prioritizing. We are also looking at those that need to be fast-tracked. We also must get into the headspace as Parliament and as South Africans. Do we want to have a quota of laws every year? Do we need new laws every year as South Africans? Do we want to pile new laws on the others which we have not actually monitored as implementation of? Because my argument, and it is not Parliament's argument, is there must come a time when the quality of the legislation and the impact of the legislation is far more important than the number of pieces of legislation that you churn out of Parliament. So I would say it is more important for me to produce quality legislation which will impact in those sectors of the people who are expecting the law than just to tick the boxes and say, oh, 20 bills, good, good, good. What if they actually have no impact whatsoever in changing the lives of South Africans? There was a question that says, whose business is it really to ensure that legislation is implemented? Parliament has committees, legislatures have committees, the municipal level has committees. These committees, their business is to ensure that the executive function is monitored, the executive is held to account. It is not just about following the money, it is also following the performance of the money. It is ensuring that the bills, as they come through parliaments, because once they are in Parliament, they become our business. We can change the laws, we can reject them. So it is our loss. Make sure that South Africa begins to retain. Because if you look at all of South African political parties, every 5 years, we bleed MPs. They go. So you don't actually build capacity and expertise within Parliament throughout all the parties. So begin to get to where you actually create pockets of excellence in Parliament, in the legislature, at municipalities. Retain, because this will then enable you, as you draft the legislation, as you pass it, to know this one is not going to be implementable. I'm wasting my time. So the job, the people who must police implementation is not just those institutions of that support democracy. Number one is Parliament, your backbencher. That's our job. We must follow the law, we must criticize the law, we must fight on behalf of the people who have sent us to Parliament. And that is why you need to sometimes look at why we are setting up the legislative sector. It is to begin to build some muscle amongst your ordinary MPs who are not the executives, to be able, without fear or favor, to stand up and say, no, no, but that is not what this law says. This policy says. And that is why we were excited to be part of the BRICS Parliamentary Forum, because it went beyond just scrutinizing and monitoring the laws. The BRICS Parliamentary Forum says, and even the treaties and the agreements and any other expenditure that you will get in on our behalf as the family of BRICS Parliament, we will monitor. That is a first in the world, because up to then in South Africa, the minister, the head of state, they could enter into agreement, and all we could do as the legislative sector would be to note. We did not have the powers to say, we don't think you should have been in this agreement. We think this is how you should go about your business. So in a way, the BRICS Parliamentary Forum says we take the license to interfere on behalf of our people. And for me, that's good, if it is progressive, because it should not be just about interfering because you are scoring points. It should be really looking at whether or not it is in the interest of the people that we interfere and say, we don't agree with that policy. We agree, we support this one. We think, in fact, we can introduce an amendment to that one to strengthen your hand to make sure that you do that. The same lady asked us why we are not doing a succession in parliament. Opposition parties do shadows. Those who are running government, you would not need to have a shadow speaker, because the Speaker of the National Assembly has a deputy called Lechisa Tsenudi. Lechisa Tsenudi and the Speaker have a Frolik, they have Maburoto, and they have Didiza as assistants. So the National Assembly has 5 people. But in the event that none of the 5 is present, the rules of Parliament will enable any other member in good standing in the National Assembly to come in and preside. The same rule applies in the National Council of Provinces. So there is no, if you are in the governing party, there is no need to do that. But one of the reasons why it is important for the legislative sector to look at an academy, it is precisely because it will give us the opportunity to produce aspirant members, aspirant presiding officers there. We will give them the technical know-how there and prepare them for when opportunities come. But parliaments throughout the world, it's very few where there is a letter, I hereby beg to become the Speaker of the National Assembly. No. That is a decision that is taken by the party that garners the most votes. Sis Baleka, I think I left the one for the youth for you.
Being the youngest.
I'm saying being the youngest, we are deferring to you.
Yes, I just turned 16 on Heritage Day. There was a question much earlier about if you had the opportunity, what would you do better? And it brings to mind for me that an area where we were the leader, I think Thandi mentioned that, was gender budgeting. And then something happened, I don't know, that was the first parliament back in 1994. As we went, as the terms came and went, we were getting tired. I don't know what happened. Of course, faces change. People's consciousness are not at the same level, and therefore their robustness in pursuing a particular level of determination, which in our view is something that must never ever be sacrificed, is to attain and never to give up on that voice that speaks on behalf of the millions of our women, whether it be in terms of their ability to be free of the shackles in their homes. Because as a gender activist said in Nigeria, you don't need breasts to cook and to wash dishes.
Absolutely.
Ayifuna mabele loo nto. Ayifuni mabele into yokuthi kufuneka ukline indlu. No, you can go and clean the house and, you know, make the home feel comfortable, feel good, whether you are a man or a woman. And yes, women are not refusing to cook and to wash dishes, but they say doesn't need breasts. And it must free, what we're saying is, let's free the men to do the things they are ashamed of doing. We're giving you freedom to use your right to cook as a man. Really, and I want in particular the young women and men, the students, to know that many women have fought over generations for a world where there is gender equality. To do things, to have choices. And everybody must have the choice. And I speak as a woman who has a husband who cooks so well. I've always had that. So I celebrate that. The freedom for men to know they can excel also in the kitchen. So I'm concerned that the trends show that, I mean, today our society is saddled with the problem of femicide. What is it? What has gone wrong? What's the problem? Thandi and Jessie Duarte went the other day, last week, to see 10 women who were victims of gender-based violence. Men throwing acid on their faces, stabbing their private parts, just being so horrible, not being like the sons that we women give birth to and bring up. Not to be horrible animals that do things that, in fact, animals in the animal kingdom don't do. So there's something drastic that in this country and other countries, humanity must still do more to improve on. And I listened with such pride to the woman who chairs in Norway, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, that focused the collective mind of human beings on the matter of how women during wars are the battleground, are the basis of, you know, expressing the worst in human beings. And a man in Congo focused his energies and his skills and his expertise on healing those women who are the victims of horrible, horrible people that go and rape women during wars as part of a weapon of war. Why must women be the victims? And I'm saying there's something more we need to do. Because when a woman no longer feels she loves the husband, and the husband decides, well, if you no longer love me, then I'm messing you up, because you have no right to say yes or no. And no is no. So that's what I'd like us to change. And I think we must never ever get tired of finding ways to do this better. And of course, a young girl comes out of an experience of being a victim of ISIL. And she comes out having been a sex slave, kidnapped by these people. And she comes out and she wages a campaign. She wages a campaign enough that today she is together with Dr. Mukwege in Congo, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. I think maybe on the front of bills, I think this is an opportunity for us maybe to share also about what happens in Parliament when we are in the process of passing legislation. In particular, in the context of a year like this one, where obviously this is the last year, we're moving towards the end of the last term, of the 5th term that we've been working through. So, at the very beginning of the year, we said to ourselves, look, this is not any other year. In fact, we're all from different political parties beginning to look as members of our parties, because we all come from different political parties, remember? That's why it's a multi-party forum, Parliament is. Its structures are multi-party, and so the structures are made and the agenda is such that it enables people to continue with their lives as members of different political parties, and therefore, even this year had to be looked at collectively and to say, we must have time for members to go away and do the things that their political parties require them to do. But they must also come back and do what they need to do by way of passing laws. But it can't be like any other law, year. And therefore, in this year, we then put a rule that the executive, that is the cabinet led by the president, must have a different way of looking at the bills that Parliament will do everything possible to make sure we pass this year. Because there are laws that are about those mechanisms that are necessary for the election which is happening next year. And therefore, those must be priority. But all bills that come either from members of Parliament as individuals or that come from different ministers are important. But let's have a way of prioritizing that which is essential. First thing we said, every law that is in front of us or formally tabled by end of May, we will prioritize. Right? Gave the 30th of May as a deadline. And we agreed this with the executive through the leader of government business, and that is always the deputy president. Not necessarily actually always, but in recent years, it's been the deputy president that gets given that role to be part of a mechanism through which there's always consultation. So he brings the perspective of the government business. What is priority from government's perspective? And then there is the office of the speaker and the chief whip of the majority party. That's a small mechanism just to work through this particular part of things, of agreeing dates, the program, prioritization, and so on. So we said only those things that you in government have agreed are priority. If they didn't make it for the end of May, are we going to prioritize? So, in other words, there are 35 bills in front of the National Assembly. We will do the best we can up to the period just before the elections. There are those before the NCOP. They will do their best, which means it's already come through the National Assembly. That which we can't get to will wait. It will be taken through by the 6th Parliament. So there's always a rule or a set of principles that must help to take positions, to take decisions. We're already inducting future parliamentarians. So in other words, not necessarily everything is priority, especially this year. But we always do our best. Committees in between come and push the bill that is in front of them, but they too have to keep reprioritizing, rethinking whether that particular bill is really something that they must do everything to spend a lot more time on, or should they work on something else, or should they go home to the constituencies where there's a program determined by political parties because it is that time. And we all recognize that, and we make it possible for us to do things that are doable, that are relevant for that specific time in the calendar of our political programs. I think Thandi has answered the issue of shadow POs. Yeah. DS has done his part. Mutabo, I think we've finished.
No, AP. The youth. What does Parliament mean to them?
DS must answer that.
Okay. I told you about the biscuit, right?
The spare wheel.
No, I want to start here, Madam Speaker, Chairperson. Around 1993, in a workshop of the International Union of Local Authorities, Africa section, for the 4 days, we had discussions of a variety of issues. And then on Thursday, some of us were elected into a 5-team to summarize what we had done in those 4 days and present and elect someone else to present it to a delegation of donors who would join us on the Friday. So the old man we asked to present for us does so. He presents the report, and then he says, because we knew you donors are going to be here, we added issues of gender and the environment. No.
You added?
No, yeah, he says. No, this was his own creative input. It was not coming from the team that drew the report, but it was his attitude towards issues of gender and environment. Now, I'm remembering that story because you asked us what else could we have done differently. Patriarchy, having been identified as one of the biggest problems that we are confronting with, needs constant dealing with. And so at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, I was invited to a meeting in Sussex for strategizing for the Commonwealth women parliamentarians on how we can increase the number of male champions of gender equality. It's not a female thing. Madam Speaker, when you're speaking, I noticed some of your senior managers, I think they need a lot of work to be done. I don't think they were persuaded. I won't mention names. But part of the story around this area of patriarchy is also the concern of what we addressed there. This story about how do we deal with this problem in our ranks, in parliament, in society, generally speaking. And we have taken that debate also in a recent workshop of the UN Women in South Africa here to talk about what they call masculinities. And how do we deal with this problem in our country and elsewhere? So the results of those discussions there will feed into the work that we must do differently this time around. Perhaps from a point of emphasis, that's one of the things we must identify as things we can do differently. I'd like to add the second thing I think we could have done differently. Where the courts found Parliament to have been in violation of the law, that's definitely areas in which we could have done differently. And there's no question about it. But also we undertook, and we think to a huge degree, the vigor and robustness of holding the executive to account has been one of the features from the mid towards the end of our term that has shown the potential that we have, that we can do differently and so on. But what the courts also did, they affirmed the very important role of Parliament and its authority. The leadership kept saying that it has at least clarified the relationship that we should have from a legal point of view, because that was also often contentious in certain areas where we were found to have been on the wrong side of the Constitution and the law. So where our position has also been confirmed, it's an important one which requires of us to constantly do political work around to improve our levels collectively as a society of political and parliamentary literacy, because that can also be a source of conflict. I feel that the question, whilst debate in Parliament is a very important platform for the public also to listen and watch, but it can't also override what the speaker called going out there and solving people's problem because of the resourcefulness of public representatives, which only perhaps in certain instances, because of their understanding of the decision-making processes and the contents of work done by departments, that they can more frontally deal with those issues. So it requires of us to reconsider and change the way in which we work. And the final point that we can do differently, the President has already announced that there's going to be a reconfiguration of the executive. And thank you very much, Chairperson, your reference to pulling up socks and stockings. Those who wear both, you must make provision for those who don't. It's a gender-sensitive language I'm absolutely impressed with, now and then changing our language because it expresses itself in practice. So that on those issues that require relationship between the executive and ourselves, that's an area that is a continuing building. The induction that we are working on already of new MPs that has been referred to is one area that we think we can always do better on, that we must increase the level of creativity that we use there. As an example, in the United States, a Congress, the Guardian paper, says how members of Congress disappointed those who watch them interviewing Zuckerberg of Facebook, that he got away with murder because of the manner in which they were handled and so on. So in a sense, it represents how the public watching us do our work. We must do things differently, and I think our capacity building, broadly speaking, and the choices that are going to be made in future, we will emphasize the necessity for consideration of our ability to do our work properly, be democratic, but intensify levels of capacity building so that we continually improve. It's a contribution not only to the work of Parliament itself, but also to the ability that people can play outside as resourceful citizens, having gone through the belly of the beast. It's a very educational problem. There's no question about it. Yeah.
Deputy Speaker, you dealt with that question with access. But the young woman says, what does Parliament mean to me as a young person? That's a question I asked myself in 1993 when I was asked to come to Parliament. At that time, traditionally, all parliamentarians were white-haired people and women over menopause. And we were young, just married, and I thought, But Parliament is important for young people because, one, South Africa has a very youthful nation. 40% is young. The laws that we make, if we may quote Mandela, Sisbaleka, when he wanted to retire and we said no, he said, I have forgotten what it feels like to be 18. So how do you want me to preside over a country that has millions of people who are 18 years old? So it's important for young people to actually line up and take interest into their future. And your future is regulating and legislating on your lives for better. And the best thing to do that is not to do it from outside, it is to get in there. And you will come in better prepared than ourselves. When I went to exile, I'd never seen Parliament, not even a picture of it. You have access to Parliament. You will even have greater access if Mutapo has it in his power, Sisbaleka. After seeing the Russian parliamentary studio, we thought we will have our full studio as the South African Parliament because that channel 408, as Deputy Speaker says, is not at all accessible to all South Africans. And therefore, you must use the vehicle of the SABC to be accessible to your people. And you can only do that if Parliament actually fights for its slot, runs its own affairs, and beams through that. And it is very easy. We pay a lot of money to get into these other platforms when, in fact, we should. But that we can also do if young people in universities get nearer. I shared with some students from Stellenbosch earlier on that when I was chairperson of the defense committees, I used to visit my counterpart in the UK. And I absolutely envied him the amount of research he had at his tips because he had the Oxford University students in his office. He had access to all the London School of Economics and all the sides of issues defense. He had it covered because he had all these students who seconded themselves there. And it was a mutual beneficial relationship. Now, if you look at us in Parliament, students only come to us if we dare invite them for the State of the Nation address or if we have a youth parliament. Currently, we need to actually have access to our children and they need to see which career option they want to exercise into the future. So I would say yes, get in there. Don't wait for us to die and then age and then try to come in. Get in there and run your own country from these chambers.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I'd like to add a perspective here. The first part to going into the field of public representation at the three spheres, national, provincial, and local, is politics. Politics has a bad rap because of the things that perhaps some of us do wrongly and out of order. And so others take advantage of that to besmirch politics generally. But you must see through the propaganda because politics is about making decisions that have a huge impact on the majority of people in a country where you live, including globally. So those who do want to monopolize politics also want to keep away as many of people as possible so that they dominate. So my view is that young people must respect politics for what they can do. For example, they represent you following your aspirations, your political aspirations. What kind of society would you like to see in your lifetime? What are the values that politics should have? You can't only do it rhetorically. You must be engaged to influence it to a different direction. I can tell you that in the private sector, broadly speaking, what we have gotten to understand, when they employ senior leadership to go and work for them outside in other countries, not only do they look at your professional skills and qualification, they also look at your general sensitivity to the political environment, socio-political environment, broadly speaking, whether you'll be able to operate smoothly there. Because if you are not, you are going to be eaten for breakfast by others wherever you are going. And you know, breakfast of all meals is often the cheapest. So it's really a crucial thing that you get involved in politics. It doesn't have to always be formal, but it is better if it is formal, so that you also are able to implement the ideas that you'd like to see happening in society generally. It's an avenue for doing that. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that question here. Thank you very much, Mulot. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, presiding officers. I think we need to agree that the responses were very comprehensive, and in the interest of time, and I know that you will agree that you will not want us to detain you here longer than we were supposed to. So can we take few last round, or we don't have to take the last round, you are covered? Okay, let's take, yes, we'll take the last round of 5 hands. Starting from this side. I see that there's quite a lot of interest now following the responses, but I'm going to also repeat the request that we keep it short and straight to the point, whether it's compliments, it's questions, or comments. Okay, starting from this side, you will be the first. And then the fighter, you will be the second. You'll be the third. You will be the fourth on that table. Fifth and sixth. And seventh.
And then
ninth. 10th at the back, at the very back. 11th.
No.
Okay, so it's covered. You'll be the 12th. Okay. I'm going, because I'm trying to accommodate, to be as accommodative as possible. I'm going to ask that 2 minutes each. Okay. 1 minute each. 1 minute each. All right. So I'm going to be timing, and if I stop you, don't be offended. Okay, let's start.
Thanks, Moloto. My name is Babalo from Eyewitness News. Speaker, the Constitutional Review Committee looking into Section 25 for land expropriation without compensation, you recently gave them an extension. They've requested an extension. I'm not sure whether you've already granted them that extension. When can we expect this process to conclude? Will it be before the 6th Parliament, or will it happen now before the end of the 6th Parliament? You know, a special sitting to discuss the report and its findings, etc. And on the recent incident there in Parliament, have you had any updates, Speaker, regarding that shooting incident in the precinct? And are the presiding officers not at all concerned about the general well-being of parliamentary officials?
Okay, thanks. And the second?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Malukanye Gogo, the SRC chairperson of CPUT Mopri Kimbas. I'm actually partially captured by the lecture skipper, but there is a question that I would like to ask, or like, it's more like a comment. I thought as you present everything that you presented here, I thought that you will just give us a glimpse of a free decolonized education, just to pass by. As you know that we have been struggling for these past 4 years, starting from 2015, 16, 17. I thought that you would just pass by, just to give us a glimpse, and it was proclaimed by the former president. As he said, yeah, there is a free education that is going to start by first years. So we are not sure about the implementation of it yet, because there are still debts for first years. So my question is on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Miki Meji. I am a gender activist. There was just a few things that I just wanted to get clarity on. There was mention about legislation that has been there, and I need to remind the Society of South Africa that our legislation has to be complementary of each other. The one law cannot pull that way and the other law pull another way. I'm particularly concerned about the lack of willingness to address an issue that affects mostly poor black women, and this is the issue of the system of prostitution. Recommendations have been made by both the South African Law Reform Commission as well as the high-level panel to prioritize the issue around legislation that will govern or police prostitution, or maybe even end it. This year we had hoped that it would be a priority, and we are saying this because we commemorate Utatu Madiba this year. And in 2005, on the 19th of March, this is what he had to say about the issue of prostitution. He said, I quote, "For every woman who has to sell her life for sex, we condemn to a lifetime." And now if we are saying that we are continuing the long walk that Utata began so many years ago to freedom, surely he did not view the selling of sex or women having to sell the sex as freedom. For him, he even compared it to a condemnation of a lifetime imprisonment.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I think the point is clear. Next.
Thank you, Chairperson. My name is Mhle Dlamini. I'm representing SAMU Trade Union. My question is, I've heard from the speaker earlier on when she said the audit that they got as a South African Parliament reflected a clean audit. That was good news to hear. We would like to know how often or how frequently do we get a clean audit? That's my question.
Thank you very much. Fifth.
Greetings to the House at large. My name is Mkita Mhlanga, the SRC chairperson at College of Cape Town City Campus. I would be brief on my questions. Basically, my first question would actually go to our honorable member, Umamutandi Modise, what she mentioned earlier about that government is not here to create jobs. However, it actually puzzled me on what she mentioned, because from what I have observed is that the majority party, when they're doing their manifesto, that is the promise they first promise when they're doing their manifestos, when they're having to come and bakangase votes on our communities. Then my second question with that, I have also just discovered that there's a number of students that have managed to graduate in many institutions. However, the only problem that we're facing is this now. There's a number of students that have been jailed due to the Fees Must Fall campaign. And those students are having a criminal record that is on their names. Now, my issue is that how are these students going to be able then to go ahead and pursue their careers when they're having criminal records that is under their names, and then it's taking 10 years of a criminal record to be removed under your name?
Thank you very much.
Good day to my fellow at large. I'm Sinto Rogers from College of Cape Town City Campus. Firstly, when it comes to the TB issue and any other disease for that matter, I think don't you think what we need to look at is running campaigns that will publish books that are child early development friendly, so can give them deeper insight of the issues? I believe there's a saying at now in this instance, secondly, Honorable Mambaleka, you had mentioned that there are a number of activities you and your colleagues are involved in. However, you have not given us a glimpse of these activities. You had also mentioned that now with you and your colleagues filling up these spaces and doing all these activities and leaving us out as the youth, as not involved in these numbers of activities you're involved in. Thank you.
Thank you. 7.
Thank you.
Hello. It will be a compendious input indeed. My name is Cedric Mboyisa. I'm from South African Sugar Association, a statutory body which represents the sugar industry, which operates in KZN and Mpumalanga. In the last financial year, we were decimated by the avalanche of imports, especially from Brazil and UAE. So my question is around the issue of saying that it has become a matter of urgency that we should look into diversification. So my question is basically to the presiding officers, will they be supporting the industry as one of the feedstocks for the biofuels program, which is being spearheaded by the Department of Energy? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the Speaker and the Chairperson of the National Provinces. You know, I'm Hilda Dude, ex-member of Parliament. It's not a question as such, but it's in relation to Umasisulu celebrations. My question, therefore, is Masisulu is one of those members of Parliament that retired from Parliament, and that we know that she was a nurse. My question is, what program, activity does Parliament have to celebrate the 100 years of Masisulu? We have had different activities celebrating Nelson Mandela. What are those activities that are there in celebrating this gallant, mother of the nation?
Thank you, ma'am.
I'm thinking that Masisulu was a nurse. We can focus on all the diseases, for instance, that are very common to women, and that be activity that Parliament can engage on. Just want to know about that.
Thank you.
Number 9.
A last question here.
Thank you. Greetings to all congregated. My name is Karabo Khachau. I am the outgoing caucus leader of the Democratic Alliance Student Organization in the SRC of the University of Cape Town. My submission is more an echo than a question, and I'm standing here highly frustrated because this question was posed before, but still there wasn't submission response to it. I'm standing on 3 grounds. 1, as a student, secondly, as a woman, and thirdly, as a young person. And I'd like to honor Omama, actually, for being examples of what it means to be powerful women in society, and I'm quite inspired by you, and as a young woman, look towards being that person as well. However, as a young person, I think we can to date still say South Africa's youth is lost and without direction, particularly because the people who are deployed in our parliaments do not show initiatives that serve the interest of young people and therefore the future of South Africa at large. When you look at the policies that are being put in government are not people-centered, let alone youth-centered within our communities. And as a student, you find our ministers of education within the different sectors who don't engage with students to find out what it is that students are engaging on the ground. You go to high schools, you find students or femme bodies without sanitary pads on a daily, yet there is no policy that's trying to ensure that that is not a problem. Yet everywhere we go, we have condom dispensers showering our heads, yet we don't have such available for women. That's one. And then secondly, as young people within our communities, we face violence
violence that is either, abusive within our relationships or within our romantic relationships or even within our upbringing, domestic violence that is also not being challenged. And young people are, again, not at the forefront of these conversations, and yet we are meant to, within a democratic dispensation, have faith in government that does not involve young people in their discussions and does not lead them forward.
Thank you. The last hand. Yes.
Good day, Molweni. My name is Sizwe Ngame, the president of the Black Business Chamber. Let me first applaud the presiding officers and Umamu Bale Gambete, our Speaker of National Assembly, and Deputy Babu Chinoli for the good job that we have done. In this 1 minute, let me start by saying, as the business community, we are very much concerned about what happened in the Ministry of Finance. Because for us, the first office that is very important in the land is the office of the president. And after the office of the president is the finance office. And in the last 3 years, we see instability within that office. That affects the business community. Secondly, there are 3 demons that are eating us, that are killing us as a community. 1 is inequality, 2 is unemployment, 3 is poverty. And each and every State of the Nation address from our previous presidents, if you can see there, these demons has been highlighted, and there is a political will to address these demons. However, having a political will, but we're lacking the implementation and evaluation and monitoring to cast out these 3 demons. And lastly, on my side, we cannot address or demolish or reduce these demons if we are not spending more investment in the rural economy. I'm saying this, if you are looking at people who are coming from rural areas, there are lots of people who live, they are decent houses, decent homes, opting to stay in the shacks in urban areas. Because in those areas, there's no commercial activities. And Uba Mahlangu, as I am under him, serving under him, as a subject of Baba Mahlangu, can witness that. Lastly, Baba,
thank you very much, Mr. President. We really appreciate.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, so that we are fair to everyone. Thank you very much for the questions. Most of them are comments. I'm going to hand over to the presiding officers to deal with them.
I'm sure we have 5 minutes each. Can I start? I'm just asking myself where I start. Making a difference between government facilitating and arranging things such that business and the conditions for business ensue. That is different from government giving jobs. Now, for students, I would want to suggest that perhaps, because it's going to be a very long lecture, perhaps we need to look at the difference between a developmental state, which we say we want, and a welfare state. Because therein you will find the answers as to why I say it is in a mixed economy model which South Africa agreed to during the negotiations, that the most likely solution is that government creates conditions which enable business to create jobs. You will also, if you've been around long enough, know that from 2009, that government has actually created what in other provinces they call job opportunities, created enablers to ensure that we mitigate and lessen poverty amongst our structures. So put those things together, the EPWPs, the social grants, the whatever, all types of grants, the free housing, the free medication, and then look at how you then expect government to compete with business to create jobs. And I'm saying for students, it might be a good example of where you take time off and learn to make the differences. Now, how frequently have we had, we didn't clean audits. We can tell you that in the last 4 years we've had clean audits. We may have in the past, I don't know if you have the figures, we may have sometimes issues which the Auditor General has issues with, corrections that need to be made, whatever. But also, again, as South Africa, some of us who've tried to understand finances will tell you that this thing of clean audit is a very difficult phenomenon. But the simple thing is that if you accept 10 rand, you must be able to account for 10 rand, not 8 rands. You must not account for 12 rands because then we will wonder where you got the extra. So that is the simple arithmetic of it. On the question of prosecution, well, Sis Baleka and I come from an organization called the ANC Women's League, which started the work on whether or not you legalize and you protect the women who are forced into prostitution. Now, every time we discuss the issue of the legalization or not of prostitution in South Africa, you must remember that we are also a largely very Christianized country. And when government legislates, it must take time to ensure that all sectors and stakeholders in South Africa in each area of whatever it is that you have in front of you have been given a chance to say something. So yes, I know, there is Uspika Mekwe in Gauteng. She's doing a marvelous job, actually, dealing with this matter and pushing for a possible quick legislation on the matter. But she has taken the trouble to meet up with, to understand the industry, to help where they can. So we are not doing anything. We cannot force-feed South Africans with the law to do this. You need to consult, and the job of Parliament is to consult all stakeholders. So that matter will come, but in any case, I think all of us would want to see a country called South Africa where women do not self-select into prostitution. So we do not want to see the solution of the disempowerment of women being, I opt to become a prostitute because at least I will not be harassed by the police. So I'm simply saying, I hear what you are saying. We are in that space. We will try and deal with that. Students jailed. I know Lechesa will come into it. It's also a difficult one, in the sense that we do sympathize with what the students were standing for. We do not want to see our children criminalized. We, however, must wait for this process, because when you correct something, you do not break the law on one hand to correct something there. There is a discussion, I think, somewhere where the processes, because you don't also, as the state, want to break your own laws. Allow these processes and see at the end of it how you can come in to help out that situation. So it will be premature for us to say to you, "Nomtana mahambo yochisa isikolo tomorrow again." There will be no repercussions because you were fighting for free education. do whatever protest we have legalized, do whatever protest, but what we do not want to see, even when we are sympathetic to you, is to see vulgarization of your needs. We do not want to see our children turning themselves into criminals. We have taken issue as Parliament with the police during those strikes. When the students came to Parliament and they wanted to arrest, we came in between them. But we cannot stand between you and a man whose shop you have burned down. We cannot come in between you and when you have burned down a campus. Then you need to let that process take its place and then see whether at the end of it all, there are lessons learned and whether pardons will be accorded. But I would want to say to students, find a smarter way to tackle your government. There is a change now. When I burned buildings in 1976, I had no government that I could call my own. I did not participate. I was not even recognized as a citizen. You have a better luck because you can confront your government. You can march into Parliament. You can march to legislatures. You can challenge things in the courts. We did not have that. I don't know whether do you want to come in?
Thank you very much. Is that okay now? Yeah, I think so, yeah. Thank you very much. Just a word or two on the subject Madam Chairperson is raising now. As public representative, we have a responsibility to draw boundaries and keep them firm. And those boundaries are about things that we ourselves do and should be doing, and if we cross those boundaries, that we must be taken to task by the appropriate authorities, both inside and outside of Parliament. Similarly, we expect the same morality to exist in society as a whole. We must be a law government society. The moment we sacrifice that, there will be no order, nobody will benefit from that process, and we must appreciate why the police, for example, when they act against people who break the law, must be allowed to do so, unless they, in carrying out that function, break the law themselves. Then this is why we have the IPIT, which will step in to check whether what they did was appropriate or not appropriate. We must not compromise issues of legality and appropriate censure for those who break the law, so that we create an environment in society, all of us, irrespective of who we are, can live in a peaceful, orderly manner. Where there is a possibility, I know that this matter is being discussed with the Minister of Justice, with the Minister of Higher Education, but they too have to respect the boundaries they have. Once it is in the hands of the police and the courts, that's where it should be dealt with and allowed to handle. The courts have taken umbrage at what Parliament said. We have said before that there are certain concerns we had about what was referred to as courts overreaching into areas that are strictly speaking political and should be taken by the political institutions and so on. And so the courts have said no, but no, we didn't cross the boundary. There are debates and discussions between us around those issues. Behind those discussions is this matter of boundaries must be laid firmly and so on. Because we can't accept breaking the law. It's not acceptable in any society, irrespective of wherever we are and so on. The discussions about what can be done differently and so on, those we can't engage, we can't get involved directly as presiding officers. They are in the hands of the appropriate authorities. In our oversight work through our committees, they will brief us of where that's going to go and how far we will be dealt with those issues. On the whether we will support the sugar industry, no, sir. As public representative, as presiding officers, we will hear the discussions with the appropriate authorities on that matter.
They know better whether agreeing and supporting sugar in the fuel industry is appropriate or not appropriate, and whether they'll support it. They'll bring it to Parliament for debate. We can't prejudge that debate and discussion. But thanks for being here and raising it as an issue. We will raise it with them. That you've raised it, you are concerned, you want to hear it, and they will no doubt communicate with you. We have serious levels of poverty and inequality in our country. In fact, we are almost leading in a number of areas in that respect. But everything we are doing as a country is being reported to us as Parliament. It's coming out of the Jobs Summit. We will hear it when it is formally reported. But all of the work we are doing, the infrastructure, for example, as an area in which is intended to drive inclusive economic development. These initiatives are intended to create a foundation for jobs, to review where appropriate legislation, for example, whether municipalities, in the work they do, whether there are opportunities they are not taking advantage of, to create appropriate environment for facilitating, as the chairperson says, doing those jobs. But in those jobs that we do necessitate, but some of you would have seen vacancies in Parliament for jobs and so on, those must be handled sensitively, done appropriately, so that they are kept at the appropriate levels across the legislative and government sectors, or the state in general, that those must be treated with the sensitivity they, in discussions and debates with every stakeholder in that environment. So the job we are doing, the budget we are talking about, we are saying in our negotiations with the Minister of Finance and those who have come before him before, that as an arm of the state, we require being resourced appropriately so that we protect sorry, every cent, every public cent, so that it is used appropriately. Because if we do not have the appropriate resources to carry out this function, to go to those areas, to ensure that what was said is going to be done there is done and done appropriately, is carried out, because that money will go to useful protection of public resources across the legislative sector. This is the agenda before the Speakers Forum, which has met every quarter since the last 4 years, at least regularly, perhaps more than before, and is aiming to do that. No, almost every year we have a focus on youth. So it can't be correct that we are not doing anything about the youth. Every year we've had an activity on inviting, and the provinces themselves, legislatures, have held youth activities aimed at looking at what youth are doing, how can it improve situations. In the most recent past, I, on behalf of the presiding officer, spoke at a Nelson Mandela Parliament Youth and Children's Fund. And those came from provinces after several activities in those provinces, and then some people were appointed to come into the parliamentary systems to talk about issues. So when individually you may not have been part of it, please, man, locate and interface with the local legislatures. You will get information about when it happens and so on, because we could do more, giving more resources, but what we are doing, we think, is going to a great extent to create conditions for better and improve youth focus. The resolutions that takes place there are very interesting. Madiba's argument about bringing the vote to 14 years and so on was brought up again during the latest Children's Forum by a 10-year-old fellow who said he doesn't understand why, if he can comprehend the politics of the moment and he's got a choice for a candidate, why, because of his age, he should be prevented. We said to someone else now, here's another one of Madiba's argument. This one is going to be defeated too, like his argument before. But it's the extent to which both children and youth participate in those activities. And young people were telling us, not for the first time, what they are doing in a variety of areas. They were youth ambassadors. They now have experience of working and representing young people and then bringing those to the attention of Parliament and various people from the provinces and in Parliament and the Nelson Mandela Foundation in the recent past, so that this activity can be communicated. I think it is correct that we are not communicating sufficiently. It's not reaching as many young people as possible that that's happening, and what is the response to those things. We think it is correct to chide us that we can do better. On the matter of provision for young girls especially, to be able to keep at school and so on, the chairperson here and many MPs in their own constituencies, a lot of work is happening there to agitate for. We've even had offers from countries outside of South Africa offering to invest in projects that are looking at to manufacture pads so that this can be given to kids to ensure the stability of their education process. Again, this is an area around which there may not be sufficient communication on. That will make a huge difference to attendance of girls and young people to educational institutions on a regular basis. The Department of Health and what it is doing is directly related amongst the young people and helping to prevent early pregnancy and so on, so that people finish their schools, are activities that are aimed at improving the quality of health of young people so that they continue through the process. Of course, we can dramatize extreme examples where we have not reached. And that's unfortunate, because our intention and those initiatives are intended to be broadened to reach as many young people as possible, because in pursuing gender equality, we start there. Young boys and young girls, their conditions must be improved differently to be able to make a difference. I want to talk about the audit function in the country, not only parliamentary and the legislatures, but also government departments. We oversee them. We have to, as much as possible, as frequently as possible, be exemplary in how we manage our own resources for that. So the audit of our public resources is an important one. In discussion with the Auditor General as a Chapter 9 institution, we agreed that what he has asked for be done. We are waiting for the signature of the President so that that Public Audit Amendment Act becomes law. And then those who are found to have fiddled with the books problematically must be headed for supervision under Mike Masuta in the correctional facilities. In other words, they must be jailed and locked up or fired where appropriate. Because we do take it seriously that without that good governance, meaning the appropriate management of public resources, and the appropriate response to Chapter 9 institutions when they act on them, as the Auditor General does, there must be consequences for that. That it's not assumed that they will just speak and there will be no action. So our parliamentary amendment of that legislation was targeted at giving him teeth, or the institution teeth, so that when it speaks and acts, there is a difference in subsequent audit queries, so that we can have more, not only us, but every other player is able to do that. Where we have made a mistake in the past ourselves, in the management of our books, that will appear in the record, and the corrections we are able to do going forward will make a huge difference in hopefully providing a good example of how to do that to all other institutions and so on. Thank you very much.
The extension is CRC. Thanks, Chairperson. What do we call him?
He's a program director for now.
He's the program director.
Yes,
okay.
yes, he's taking over.
First of all, I want to go back to the prostitution. As Tadi said, we've been talking about this thing not for years, for decades. And we ended at starting to use the language of decriminalizing. Decriminalizing. And we think it makes a difference. You know, there's a difference made between legislating, like you are saying, this shall be law, you shall go and be a prostitute. No, that's not how we feel in this society, and we're guided by the values of our people. That's why our processes take long, because we want to listen and hear what our people are telling us. And we're not hearing enthusiasm for this, as Madiba was quoted. But there are problems within that space, excuse me, for the practitioners, the prostitutes. There are problems which we can't pretend we don't know. The very people who are supposed to enforce the law victimize women who are prostitutes, whether they went into it enthusiastically or they were forced because there's no other option. And I've looked at women, elderly, very decent women, saying they have been forced sometimes to use their bodies to survive with their families. So in the interim, while we continue the discussion, engaging, listening to one another, persuading one another, we are decriminalizing, because you can't have the very people who must enforce the law victimize the victims. Because very often police also rape the prostitutes. You can't have the police raping the prostitutes when they must protect that human being who has a right. It doesn't matter that she's a prostitute. She has rights. She continues to have access to the rights that we have all fought for. So we are continuing of decriminalizing, so that when you are caught, we don't encourage you, we don't say we celebrate, but we can't make a bad situation worse. Clean audits, yes, sis. Who was asking about how many? In this 5th Parliament, we've had 4 clean audits. And we believe that the next one will also be clean, even as we bow out of Parliament, waiting for others to come and take over. And we hope that they'll continue on that trend. You've dealt with the issues of my students. We do have different activities, and the information is there in our documents. You can find out in the website, you can find out in the documents, some of which are circulated here, maybe others not, and the more we circulate the information, Mutapo, the better. Hilda, she was asking about Masur.
In the back.
First of all, we produced a concept document about the centenary, about both Madiba and Masisulu. And what we tend to do is not to separate them, is actually to talk about the values, so that our approach is not confined in their lives, the story, and so on. It's about selling and promoting the values that have been shown and have been bequeathed to us through the lessons of their actual lives. The things they did, the approaches they had, the example they set to us, in what they stood for and in how they led us. So it's been infused into different activities of Parliament. For instance, recently we were launching the books that talk about the work of Parliament when it would come and sit as the two houses focused on the writing of the Constitution. We talk about what happened in those years, in those days, and how they set examples for us in many different ways throughout the work of all those structures that we talked about, or that the books that we have since published are continuing to sell the message that their lives set actually in practice. I want to refer to the Speakers Forum, which is the forum that leads the whole legislative sector, because it is there that, for instance, the way society views politicians and political work is not actually accurate, that every politician is corrupt, or politicians from a political organization, a particular political organization is corrupt. That's not actually factual. It's not true. But it's something we must accept, that some of us have done things and work is continuing that exposes things that some of the politicians in this country and in other countries have done, which are wrong, which really need to be condemned. And in fact, as the legislative sector, which is the sector through which we do oversight, we get to actually have a role of probing into the things that have gone on that were wrong. We need to be vocal in what needs to be corrected. And as the legislative sector, and I must again commend Gauteng, the Gauteng legislature and the presiding officers of that legislature, who led in the discussion about how we can play a role as the people in the structures that we lead, from whom is expected to exercise the oversight role in such a way that we can get to naming the problems, we can get to saying what needs to be done to correct the things that are wrong that have been done, even by some of us. And therefore, we took a decision in the Speakers Forum that we are going to be working on a draft of something that must result maybe in the 6th term in a legislative framework to assist political practitioners to use their role in society, not to pursue wrong things, but to actually be exemplary in ensuring, for instance, in Parliament, we have an ethics committee. I know that the other day, some of us were in the media supposedly for violating the codes. I think sometimes we use words. I don't know. Loosely. We use words. What? You must remember, I'm a teacher. So, you know, sometimes in the choice of word, let me leave it there. But all I'm saying is that ethics, we said, let's do an audit throughout the legislative sector to see what are the bodies that we have. In Parliament, we have the Ethics Committee. We also have the Powers and Privileges Act that gives and takes away powers or authority to do things or not do things or specify what must not be done. But all of it should be utilized to assist us to stay away from trouble. Because we must be exemplary. And so we will now pursue this matter in the 6th term to make sure that we improve the space, the environment in which people who get elected or get appointed in the state sector have a framework to help them. Even when their fingers are tempted to get into a cookie jar somewhere, just to remember those codes and withdraw their fingers. Lastly, Lubabalu second. You are asking the question, do the presiding officers care? How can we not care about a life? Oh, concerns about employees. I think earlier, one of the presiding officers talked about the labor issues, the environment, and in the 5th term, we have to tell you that I was a presiding officer the first 3 parliaments. It's only in the 4th term I was away working at a head office of the majority party, and then I'm back. I have never known presiding officers to be so preoccupied with the labor issues. And we can tell you in more detail what successes we have scored. Because remember, we are not hands-on in the labor environment. We don't. Parliament has a parliamentary service that operates under the accounting officer, and the acting accounting officer is here, Umamukiawa. So there's more than 1,000 staff members that are playing different roles. But the buck stops with us here. The buck stops here. The buck stopping here does not mean we know what's going on there on a daily basis, because otherwise we wouldn't do our job for which we were elected. So we have forums where we get regular reports. It can't be too detailed. We know the structures, we get reports, but they are not very detailed on the daily stuff. So when an event like what happened on the 14th, which was a very, very sad event, happens, we are shocked. We are traumatized. So, and it so happened that I was leading a multi-party delegation that was out there in Cuba learning things from how that society survives in spite of other problems that as humanity we inflict on them, and how they actually a very, very it's actually very good, and you learn a lot from people who have a difficult experience, but what it does, it instills discipline. It's character building. And when we send our children there to go and learn, they also come back with an experience of difficulties that are also character building. But in the meantime, we lose a life this side. So last week, we take this opportunity to report. Mam Thandi and I visited the Garane family. Kahane family. They actually tried to help us learn how to pronounce that name. It's very sad. It's unnecessary. It's unnecessary But we can just report that we had a constructive engagement with them. We went there simply as South Africans, as people who come from a society that has ways of dealing with such traumas, and therefore that guided us in our interaction with that family. They are a strong family. They are still going through pain, but our visiting them was something that they commented at the end. They didn't know when we said we were coming how that interaction was going to be. But we ended up, all of us agreeing it was very important for us to visit them. It was a healing process. It was a step in the direction of all of us breaking free of that trauma, because it's a trauma that affected the family, but it also affected the people that work around the member of that family. It also traumatized us as parliamentarians as well as the staff in parliament. Lastly on that, we assured them that we are determined that we will only build on whatever initial investigation and probes that are being done, and we will ensure that in the end we come out with a report that will, reveal to all of us what were the circumstances surrounding or leading up to that event. We want an impartial and independent probe, and out of that, we will all have lessons. We will have lessons, hopefully, that will take us to as much closure as you can hope to get out of a trauma like that, but also which will ensure that something like that never happens again in our environment. The one thing that it raises sharply with us is the question of our security measures. Because nobody must be able to enter the precincts with a weapon. If we were now, as the presiding officers, to share with you our frustrations with the fact that as Parliament, our budget that would need to be deployed to address that particular issue does not reside with us. It resides with a department in the executive. And that's a long journey that we will not get tired of pursuing, of ensuring. Maybe, if nothing else, this is an event that will finally make it clear that this fact that our budget to address things of that nature is not in our hands is not acceptable. So that's where I want to end about the incident on the 14th. And we promise you we will do a probe, and in how the mechanism is agreed, in the terms of reference, in who in the end does it, the issue of independence, impartiality will be key in determining all of that. At this point, really, I want Mutapu to ask that we really allow people to go and have lunch. We fed you breakfast, but surely you deserve lunch. So at that point, I would like to thank you for coming and hand over back to DS.
No, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Who? He's protesting. Nyambi, come over. No, he did. Come. Mamel. go ahead, you know what to do.
Let's give the leadership a good round of applause. My task is very simple. It's clear that if you look at the arms of the state in South Africa, this is the only one where you have two warm bodies. Because if you go to the executive, it's only the president. If you go to judiciary, it's the chief justice. But if you come to parliament, you have got the speaker of the National Assembly and the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces. That is why it's a complex process to get to a situation like this one. But be that as it may, they deserve another good round of applause. I'm standing between yourself and lunch. We like to take this opportunity to thank all of you for availing yourself and making this thing to be very meaningful. Without you, it was not going to be possible. We are grateful, we are not taking this thing for granted. Out of it, we are learning. And when we are prepared, the final legacy report for the 6th Parliament, they will take it from what we have done today, and they will build out of that experience, and we officially adjourn and get to lunch. Thank you very much.
Mandela, tell you.